last time I was this pleasantly surprised by a Netflix series was House on Haunted Hill. So think about that for a second. Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Always Watching. So I got a request in the comments to look at Unorthodox, and I actually had watched the show before by accident. The trailer had come up, I looked at it and I was like, do I really want to get invested? And then sad. And then right next to the trailer was like a making of, and you don't really get a making of unless you're like really good. So then I said, okay, I'll give it like 5 minutes to get good. And then the entire series later, I was really sad. And it's a gem. So I'm just gonna summarize like the framework of it, just to get you like interested, and then talk about like why you should watch it. And then, yes, so let's go. So just to summarize like a gist of it, the story is about a little girl who grows up in Williamsburg, New York City. She grows up in a very conservative, Orthodox Jewish community, hence the title. And so we meet her at a fork in the road. So she's getting married, and she doesn't, really want to get married, but because she grew up in such a tight-knit community, her only job is to get married, have kids, support the fam. And she's in a particularly problematic state because her mother, also having grown up in the community, like ran away to Germany because she wanted nothing to do with these people. And so everybody kind of looks at her as a liability with something to prove, hoping that she kind of follows through with the plan. So just before she's about to get married, her mother comes to visit her and gives her a passport to Germany because she has citizenship there, and says basically, girl, like run for your damn life. And her daughter kind of keeps it on the back burner. And eventually, after marriage and after kind of life was not greener, she takes her mother up on the offer and just books it. She just books it to Germany to start a new life. There she meets a cast of interesting and random characters who are musicians, and of course she's a musician, and so she's trying to start from scratch. Meanwhile, back home, her family and her husband notice that she'd run away, and she's kind of in a race against the clock to figure out if she's way in over her head or if she can make it. So that's the framework of it, and just to give you an idea of like what it's about. And so, okay, so why should you watch this? Okay, so it's a coming of age story, and if you're familiar with coming of age stories, they're all basically the same. You have young people looking for love, young people fighting against their families, young people just being annoying and really problematic. And in the end, they tend to win by either running away and starting their brand new life in isolation, or with like a new community that they just so happen to find, or they end up going home and demanding respect. And then everything ends up like happily ever after. So yawn, right? Okay, so this is different. So it's still a coming of age story, but it's coming from a marginalized group of society. I think as a minority, and as not just a minority, I don't think you have to be a minority, but a lot of these like coming of age stories, like you can't really relate to them, or if you do relate to them, you're like, why isn't my life like that? So first, it's coming from a group that is not only marginalized, but like you don't really see them. And watching this series, it's like watching a period movie or a period piece. Those movies kind of set like Marie Antoinette days. So you have like the attention to detail is really phenomenal. You feel like you're a fly on the wall. Like you feel like you're really in bed with these people. Like you're really, hearing these personal conversations. And you can't tell if this is like 2000 and in the 2000s or like in the 1800s. And then when she goes to Germany, it's like a breath of fresh air. You're like, oh. So first of all, like it's really trippy how they were able to merge like the old with the new. And it feels really fresh. Like even just watching the trailer, it felt refreshing. And that was a really tricky thing to do. So that's one reason. Another reason is, okay, so listening to my plot summary, you might think, oh God, like this sounds kind of corny. And I'm not gonna lie, like when she does go to Germany and she kind of just so happens to meet this group of friends and like all these kind of things just kind of fall into place and you're like, really? But I have to tell you, it feels very authentic and really realistic. And this is because she's really alone. Like, this is not somebody who has ever functioned outside of her family. So she's really alone she's in survival mode, right? She's trying to project an image that, like, hey, I'm also German and I'm here for a visit and permanently. So you really feel like her loneliness. So the balance, like, they took an otherwise very, very kind of corny, cliched, like, coming of age story and made it feel like very, very believable. Okay, so that's one thing. And the other thing too is I think with a lot of these like popular sort of coming of age narratives, like two things happen. Like you either watch it and you're like, fuck this, or you watch it and you try to like recreate these kind of lives, these kind of like these kind of concepts like love and, you know, the nuclear family. Like this is a very unhealthy image. And so people try to recreate that, or they feel kind of left out or, you know, marginalized if they can't. So I think nowadays, like a lot of film and movies are kind of focused on like looking at another, even just books, like literature and translation has been quite popular nowadays. Just looking at things from a different perspective and a different angle and acknowledging that people have different experiences, and just because your experience isn't the same as mine doesn't make it any less legitimate. Doesn't make it any less normal, doesn't make it any less. And I really relate to people like Miss Esther because I come from a very conservative family, and really, if you grow up in that type of environment, you have one of two options. You have to do what Esther's mom did and essentially like leave, just separate yourself completely and just get out. Or two, you have to negotiate. And by negotiate, I mean you kind of have to find a way to carve out space while at the same time like going through the motions. So all these kind of traditional or like cultural, I guess, symbols become kind of costumes. And so you're kind of going along with the motions and you're kind of doing all these things, and maybe this space is carved out through work, maybe this space is carved out through relationships, maybe this space is carved out through, you know, something other than your actual life. So a lot of people who grow up in like very conservative communities, I think they either just leave and they disassociate completely, or they end up creating these kind of like separate lives. Like they end up becoming kind of bipolar, like two people. Like there's the person you see within the fam, and there's the person who's just kind of out and about. And this goes on for a really long time. And, you know, it's not that they're lying, it's just, you know, what's the alternative? That you cut off your family completely? Like, what can you do? Okay, and then there's this third option, which a lot of people wouldn't like think of taking, which is basically forcing people to come to your table and saying, hey, this is my life, like, you need to negotiate, you need to acknowledge that this isn't like 100% correct, although while meaning like really trying to bring these two identities together, which is easier said than done. And this is very difficult for a lot of people. Okay, so this is very difficult to do for a lot of people. And the other thing I really enjoyed about this kind of storyline, besides its authenticity, and you really do, it feels like you're really seeing what an Orthodox Jewish community looks like and is like. Watching her navigate like the real world, I mean, just small things that, you know, the average person, quote unquote, should be able to do. Like, she just doesn't even know where to begin, you know, like it has short of this group of friends. Small things like I'm in a part of the world now where I had a coworker ask me, like, how do you use a debit card? Like, because she'd been married and she lived with her family, and just how do you use, like, she didn't know which side to put it in. And I was like, but that's true. When you grow up in the thing with like conservative is a very broad term, but very religious families, you're very dependent on the family. Like, you're very dependent on the group. And so it becomes survival. And so a lot of these like basic kind of tools or needs or things you're supposed to be able to do as an adult, you're not able to do because nobody showed you how to do it. Somebody else is always doing it for you. So for Esther, it was her family. And then when you get married, the idea being, it's like your husband who takes care of all of this. Like, you don't actually take care of anything. So then you watch her like navigate, and her clothes and just the stuff, like, can I wear t-shirts? Like, can can I do this and that? Like, just like her level of self-awareness is incredibly high, because there's so many things that, because she's internally trying to balance. Just because you leave the community doesn't mean you're not like part of the community. It's so internal, right? And then she's like, okay, so what does that mean? Like, if I wear a t-shirt, am I no longer Orthodox Jewish? Like, I don't. And just trying to balance like a healthy medium is quite difficult, especially when your norm is, from the outside looking in, considered like really like really like extreme and really. And the thing is, like, watching this community, especially like in such detail, like it's not that they're oppressive or that it's just a different life, and people, I think a lot of people people only understand themselves within their own communities and how it relates back to them, but there are situations or lifestyles that you can't relate to. And so there's like a really bad tendency to just make it seem like, oh well, this is really negative, or like this is really oppressive, and that's not the case, actually. So you really have to open your mind and take the good with the bad, right? And so Esther's in that balance where she doesn't want to completely disrespect her family and her culture, but at the same time she's like, no, seriously, like, can I wear a t-shirt? Like, this is problematic. And just survival. If your entire existence is based on this family, like, you're kind of a fish out of water, right? Like, soon you're gonna run out of air. And so you have to fight a lot harder to breathe and to just maintain and just to function. And I really enjoyed it. Like, you don't have to know anything about Jewish culture or Orthodox or just anything to enjoy this, but I think the message is clear, and the message is very universal. Like, being independent is really hard, and it's even harder to force people to understand this duality. Like, sadly, not all of us are the same people around our family as we are around our friends, and if you are the same around your family and friends, then you're very lucky. Honestly, you're very, very lucky, and you should enjoy that transparency, because otherwise it just turns into an us versus them, and it's really hard to balance. Like, okay, when do I tell them? Or like, well, how can I negotiate myself within this environment that raised me and gave me shelter? And that's for you to figure out, So the series is very romantic. It's very, honestly, you'll watch like 5 minutes of it and you'll finish it. Like, satisfaction guarantee. Like, just start, and if you really can't finish, or like if you really find it boring, then watch a second episode. Like, give it some time. Anyways, thanks for stopping by. Thank you for that commenter for reminding me of this. If you have any more requests or things you want me to look at, shoot me a message. I'll be happy to look at it. God knows we have nothing but time. Peace from the Middle East, and take care.